I started JapanBookHunter.com about 2.5, 3 years ago during the COVID times. And before that, I was a heavy collector of manga, art books, photo books, pretty much everything that we sell on the website. This stuff that I care about and stuff that I like. And I was buying books for friends, comic book creators, artists overseas, and and in America or in Europe, in the UK and stuff like that. And then it just kind of like blossomed from there, especially during COVID when we had a lot of free time. I built a website and I started reaching out more on social media, and then, met some people that kind of put me on, like cartoonist Kayfabe, Ed Piskor, and they really like kind of shined a light on what I was doing. And man, to answer your question, it feels good. Feels good. It's really cool to be able to like find stuff that I like and get it out to people that have similar interests, and then they get something that they like that they might not otherwise be able to ever get.
For sure. I mean, all the time, like I'll see people talk about certain books, and then you'll have it, and then people are always using like, oh, I got this book from Japan Book Hunter. Or I was able to, he had it on his website, I picked it up, or something I didn't even know about. It just looked cool, and so I went to his website, and I was like, oh, this is dope. I'm gonna pick it up. So, and I've been on that end. I bought Ed Piskor Japanese version of his Hip Hop Family Tree from your website when he posted those a while back. So that was that was a cool experience to do that. So let's get into some of like the things I want to talk about for the video. So what is like the view of like sex and like pornographic imagery in like manga over there in Japan?
I mean, it's marketed as seinen or adult manga. So it's not, I mean, I think a lot of people in the West, like they kind of, when they think about comics or manga, they think about kids materials. But here in Japan, when it comes to seinen stuff or adult stuff, ero manga, it's not for kids. It's obviously not for kids. It's age restricted. And so it's specifically made for adults that are into whatever they are into. So there's like a pretty long history of it going from the 50s up until modern day. And over those years, there's been a lot of changes within the style, within the genre, and then of course splitting of the genre into all these like subgenres and stuff like that. But really, like, I mean, you might be on the train at a cafe and look over and see someone reading a magazine or a manga with adult material in it, and that's not a strange thing. It's not a weird thing.
So why, like, do you feel like, why is it like that? Why are people like comfortable seeing somebody like reading something? They're like, oh, that, oh, you need to go away, go, that's like perverted. Like, why is that? People are comfortable, or that's more normalized over there compared to like in America. You see somebody walk around with a Playboy and they're reading it, they're gonna be like, you need to go, or you're gonna get arrested, for obscenity or something like that. Why? What in the culture of Japan makes that okay or like normalized compared to something that would be like in America?
I feel like in the West there's a little bit more of a puritanical culture. I don't mean that in a necessarily negative way, but it's not a Christian country. It's a mostly Shinto Buddhist country. So that's one aspect of it, is there isn't like a kind of a negativity around it as being like immoral or something like that. I think also in Japan, I mean, whether it's cosplay, whether it's anime, whether it's people into car drifting, whatever it is, if it's your hobby or your interest, you're allowed to have it, no matter what that is, because fact is, people work pretty hard here, and in their free time, they want to maybe escape or maybe do, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of looked at here as what you do in your own time is your business. And if you're into comics or manga or erotic anime or whatever it may be, that's kind of your business.
Okay, that's dope. That's pretty interesting. So, is I was listening to a podcast with Felipe Smith, who was a mangaka who lived out in Japan for a couple of years, and he was talking about how violence, like sex, is like you were saying, like it's it's your own thing, whatever. If that's what you're into. That's what you're into. Nobody really cares. But there's like when it comes to violence, it's like a little more iffy. Like it's not really acceptable in the society. Is that like a thing that's prevalent? Like when people like talk about violence or promote violence in like media in Japan, is it different? Because in America, you're more likely to see on TV somebody getting shot, somebody get the arm blown off or something like that, compared to like something more sexualized or anything like that. So how was that in reverse for Japan?
Well, I mean, of course, you have like Ichi the Killer, the manga, and the movies, or like Tetsuo the Iron Man. No, they were like all these like ultra violent films. The peaky violence stuff from the 70s, very erotic, very violent. So you have it in media here, but also at the same time, you don't have it in the streets like you have in other countries. A very, very safe. Not that we don't have it, but Japan is a very safe country per capita compared to like a lot of places. And I think that maybe what Felipe was thinking or getting at is the violence in society untolerated. Violence
Mhm.
in media, on the other hand, is tolerated much more, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
You think like in the same way as it is in America, like it's pretty on hand. Like there's action shows, there's like high stake shows, there's like hyper violent movies and stuff like that, or maybe a little more toned down, or how does
I
that?
think that it like ultra violent stuff or just like violence in general, it's more of a subgenre here than a mainstream. So it's like Japan's not really known for its violent action films like Total Recall, where 167 people die or something like that. It's just not really what Japan does well. Japan does dramas well. They do love stories well. They're good at they do horror very well. But even when you watch something like The Ring or Grudge, it's not a splatterfest. It's more of a psychological horror type vibe to it, right? But then you also have subgenres of indie filmmakers, manga makers, anime makers that do ultra violent stuff. So I just don't think it's as pervasive, maybe not the. I don't think it's as mainstream, but it's still there.
Okay, interesting. That is interesting to note because yeah, that might be a thing. That might be like a subgenre compared to like I don't maybe Japan didn't go through like the '80s Arnold Schwarzenegger phase of just everybody getting blown up and going in and killing all the bad guys and taking names and kicking asses and stuff like that. So that is pretty interesting to see. And there has been an uprising you could see where people who watch a lot of like Japanese dramas, Korean drama, especially for like things like Netflix and stuff, they are pushing a lot of that stuff now into the mainstream. So that is interesting because it like I guess you can kind of see that parallel where in America, at least from what I've seen, that is like the mainstream like action packed, super high macho man guy. Even now, it's like it might not be the super big buff guy, but it's like a Keanu Reeves, somebody who's just like a sniper, cold blooded type of person.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, John Wick is an awesome movie. So let's talk about like comic kick, right? Like when I'd known about like in Dojin manga specifically, not like any of the games or anything like that. That convention where like there'd be like I've seen videos and people talk about how there's floors full of like the bootleg comics of like the over the sexualized stuff. So how was that come about and your perspective on when you've seen all that stuff?
The statistic I had heard is out of mainstream manga, there's 60,000 titles released a year. So it's an insane amount of mainstream. And within that, the whole manga scene, there's thousands and thousands of people trying to get into that market. They want to be artists. And so the doujinshi or self-publishing market here is huge. And also, IP rights aren't strongly protected here. So if you go to a doujinshi specific shop, you can find a doujinshi self-published manga or comic on anything that you can think of. Whether a lot of them are boys loved, so it could be like Anakin Obi-Wan boys love,
Mhm.
Star Wars themed, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, anything Disney, anything Pixar, and then all kinds of other things. Just if you can think of it, you can find it here, basically in the doujinshi market. And I think it's just, some people love to draw and they just want to get 50, 100 copies out to people at Comedia or Comic-Con or one of these conventions. And then others, they have aspirations of actually being one of those people in the mainstream, in the shops, being sold in the shops here. But it's a tough road, so they start off self-publishing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm on that road myself, but so I mean, even like so like the boy love stuff, right? That is like a big genre out there. And so how like is the pervasive, not pervasive, but like the acceptance of like like a lot of sexual material in Japan? You feel like that's helped in opening of like the acceptance of different sexual orientations in Japan, or not? Because in America, we ain't, people aren't, there's not a genre of homosexual comics that are like mainstream or even being accepted. They're going to be like, a lot of the more popular ones will get banned like immediately because of like, certain states have more conservative views and they don't accept those type of sexual orientations. But there's that boy love is a big genre out there. So do you feel like that bleeds into the society and helps a more like fluid society, or is just more of like a fantasy type of thing?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely bleeding into society. So among the BL scene, especially doujinshi, I'd say 95% of the readers, 98% are female readers. It's a huge market for female readers. And within that scene of the doujinshi, I mean, I think when Westerners think of doujinshi, they think of like bubbly, juicy stuff made for men. But within the scene, there's a huge market for boys love stuff directed at women. And some of that stuff gets popular, becomes TV shows on TV. Like, I forget what it's called, My Brother's Husband. The couple, the two guys, and it's always about what they ate for dinner the night before. God, I can't remember the title off the top of my head. But these are things that originally started off as manga, and then they bled over into like mainstream TV and films and stuff like that. And I think a lot of that comes from the doujinshi market opening the way for these kinds of mangaka and these kinds of stories, and definitely has liberalized society here in Japan especially over the last 20 years. It's because it really is a huge market. To be honest, like, I do hunt doujinshi, but sometimes I'll go into the shops and I'll look around and I realize I'm the only guy in the shop, which is a little bit weird, So I usually go in, talk to the staff, tell them what I'm looking for, get it, and bounce on out.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah. But the same in the interview when Felipe Smith, he was talking about the boy love. He said a lot of females like to read it because they feel like they like the interactions with the couples and stuff like that. That is pretty interesting. Because again, like comparing it to America, I don't think that's not like LGBTQ stuff is for like people, or like people who check those stuff out are people who are part of that group. They don't see it as like something they can just fall into and just like, oh, I can relate to two guys having a relationship, compared to like I hear people think that's just like completely something left field, to a degree. So that is pretty interesting that it went from like being a book, and being so popular that they accepted it and made it to a show. And I'm sure those shows do pretty well, like you're saying. So that is pretty interesting. That is a interesting dynamic. So what are you said there's like super subgenres of like the adult manga and stuff like this. So what are some of the subgenres that are kind of prevalent?
Well, it's nowadays, I mean, everything's kind of changed over time. Maybe I could show you a few things. I don't know if you'll be able to get them in there, but I'll talk about them as well. But in the 60s, you had like vintage magazines like Kitan Club or Erotica, and these had stories, but they also had erotic illustrations in them. And then they started putting in like little 4-panel, like we call yonkoma manga, or 4-panel comics. And then that eventually turned into more like into manga stories later. And then in the 60s, you kind of, into the 70s, you would get like sci-fi erotica, or you would get like Edo period, like erotica, samurai stuff, samurai story erotica, or you would get kind of like vintage bondage erotica. So the bondage stuff is always, the SM themed stuff is always kind of been there from the late 60s on. And so, of course, you have that subgenre. But then as you get into like the 80s, 90s, you see a lot of split off. So you see things go, you might have something that's like very realistic story. You might have something that's very eroguro. So it's eroguro means erotic and grotesque. So violent and erotic, kind of like Suehiro Maru or Kago Shintaro, these kinds of illustrators and mangaka. And of course, many people know this one, Legend of the Overfiend, which was made into an OVA. Many people, it was their first experience seeing Maeda Toshio, who's a great friend of mine. Maeda Toshio's tentacles and demons and sex together. So then you have that genre emerging in the 80s. But nowadays, there's a little bit of everything out there. If you can think of it, it's been made. I'm really, mostly what we sell here at Japan Book Hunter is hard to find vintage stuff. So 70s, 80s, 90s stuff, which tends to be a little bit more specific thematic. Everything post 2000 has gotten really bubbly and juicy, and I don't know, it's really not my thing, to be honest. But within that genre, you have everything you can think of. Everything you can think of.
Nice. That's crazy. Those magazines you're talking about, this kind of reminds me of when I'm doing my research of like the Hustler, Penthouse, and Playboy, where they kind of did the same thing where they started off doing like little mini comics and things like that. And then Penthouse specifically branched off and made their own like Penthouse comic books that they were producing for I think like 10 years or so, or a little bit less than that. So that's interesting how Japan had their own version of that. I don't wonder if there's like a correlation between like maybe they saw Hugh Hefner or what he was doing and kind of like did their own thing or something like that. It's something I should definitely would want to look into a little bit more. So who would you think or would say is like either the most influential like series or artist from that era or just in general in that genre of like adult manga or erotica or anything like that? Or one that's
God,
your favorite, maybe.
there's just so many. I mean, you have the guys like that produce. I bet you Dirty Matsumoto did about 70 or 80 erotic manga like this, and then you have like guys from the 70s and 80s like Hachu Rui that did like a lot of stories. And similar to Playboy, we actually had Playboy comics here in Japan as well, because there's a Playboy Japan branch. And most of these guys that were published, they couldn't be published in I mean, they're not being published in Morning or Jump or Sunday or any of these, mainstream magazines. So they're mostly published in Playboy, in SM magazines. Tons of SM magazines would publish their manga. Adult magazines, Pinky magazines, which is basically, an adult magazine. And each Pinky magazine would have one chapter or two chapters of a manga in it. After they did a 1-year run of chapters, then they would have it made into a tankobon like this. And there, I mean, the number of artists is insane. But some of the ones that I think of when I think of the history up to now of adult manga here in Japan, it's Toshio Maeda, it's Hayami Jun, it's Tsuchiya Shin. I'm looking over Yujin, who was published in English as well. Like the Bondage Fairy stuff, which is really popular in the West because it got published in English. And then you also had some people like Kasuma Shiro who would do adult bondage stuff, but also copied the Playboy style of kind of silly, fun, sexy, like Super Lady Mako is a famous series, which is like she's a detective, but she's really cute and sexy. It's very Playboy-esque or Penthouse-esque manga,
Yeah, that's cool. There's a lot of information, a lot of different people, and it seems like there's a very rich history of that. Was there at one point in Japan that there was like maybe like a sort of censorship on those type of stories? Like here in America, there was hard censorship in those things like the Comic Codes Authority and things like that, where they try to keep a lot of that stuff under wraps. Is there like a history of that in Japan or?
Well, the first point to make is in Japan, you cannot show whether drawn or photographed genitalia. So it must be edited, right? So there's a way that mangaka have worked around that, as in they either kind of delete it, they put a black bar over it, or sometimes they'll make something look like an otter or a fish or a whale or an animal or something to represent what it is, to get around the censorship. But I think that that's been going on from the very beginning. Japan has always had strong censorship laws as far as that goes, So what do I want to say? So here in Japan, I think the censorship has never really changed, but it's also never gotten looser. And once in a while, I'll run across an adult manga where I'm like, I do not know how they got this past the censors, but somehow they did. And then at other times, I'll run across a doujinshi, because those doujinshi are self-published, maybe 50 to 200 copies, that has some questionable material in it because they're not being actively checked by the censors here before publishing, because they're self-publishing, right? And then they're selling it hand to hand to fans or friends or something like that. But other than that, censorship here is pretty strict and has never changed over the years.
That's interesting. That's interesting because, like you were saying earlier, it's socially acceptable for certain things to be like, people, have it in their, their own being person and stuff like that, walk around reading and stuff like that. But like in the material in there, you can't, it's not something that can be shown, like you said, like genitalia or, like any of that type of stuff. So, and so people just essentially the manga just figured out a way to work around those things in a creative or crafty way. So, and that's crazy because like in America, it's like the censorship is weird depending on like, the area you're in, the field you're in, and things like that, and it has gotten to the point now where well, manga specifically, it's becoming banned to certain states. Like I know in Texas, they're passed a law where I don't know totally what the law is, but I know they're trying to ban manga. If you go to the Comic Book Defense League website, Defense Fund League website, they have like case files of like people who went to Japan and came back and brought back some material, and they were like arrested because it's like they see this like pornography or child porn or stuff like that, and they get like in big trouble for those type of things. So that is interesting how that's kind of seen in those ways.
I do know that, I mean, because we ship all over the world, Canada and Australia are the most strict, much stricter than America, but I have heard about the Texas situation. I think one thing that people kind of miss in the West, and which has become a problem for some other countries as well, is sometimes a drawing style here for adult content will seem like it's lolicon. It'll seem like the characters are young, which is obviously not something that I want to sell, or it's not something that, it's not really what we do. But then if you actually read it in the stories, the characters look cute, but the characters are college students. The characters are office workers. The characters are police women, or whatever the theme of the story is. But since they're drawn cute, that's makes it confusing for Westerners, because they automatically assume that if it's drawn cute, it must be a child, which
Yeah.
is, like, yeah, it's sometimes I can understand it from the Western point of view. From the point of view over here, I think that it's a little bit different, because everyone kind of grows up drawing that style, especially girls. Girls love to draw bubbly characters with big eyes, and this whole style of drawing. But yeah, it's compared to America, I would say, or a lot of Western countries, I would say that there's a lot more variation here in manga, adult manga, but at the same time, yeah, it's censored.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even when manga first came to America, there was like this weird stigma around it being like overtly just perverted, like the schoolgirl outfits and the tentacles and this whole like weird like stigma, like the stereotype it was. And so like things started like Dragon Ball and Akira came over, like the Shonen Jump stuff came and became more prevalent. And then once it got on streaming platforms, it's like the biggest thing now. But even with that, those are the only things that are big. Like the, I'm saying, they read the shonen stuff and a little bit of seinen stuff, but the seinen stuff is like Berserk or Viking. What's the one? I have it over here. Vinland Saga and things like that. So like those are the stories like the hyper violent action stuff that's more curated to American audience, because that's what, like I said, we're saying. Like I was saying earlier, that's what we're used to seeing, like people fighting and things like that. But I don't know. I mean, erotica here and there, I guess it just depends on the person. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure there's somebody in America who's like you, who is into more vintage, old school stuff, more niche, underground type uh, things. So I think it is kind of interesting how people, what they focus on and what they kind of try to ignore or even demonize when it comes to certain genres of media.
Yeah, and I mean, like, I'm a fan of Berserk, and I mean, if you've read the whole Berserk series, there's some sexy, violent stuff going on in there. You know what I mean? It's like it's definitely not for kids, right? So and that's why it was so popular here in Japan as well. I mean, Berserk is one of the most popular series ever produced here in Japan. And, like, I think that here, I mean, just generally speaking, if it's drawn, if it's anime, if it's manga, if it's art, there's really, as long as passes censorship, then there's really no taboos. If you don't like it, you don't like it, and you don't buy it. And another one kind of point I should probably make is that other than a couple like erotic magazines at a 7-Eleven or something like that, these kinds of books and manga and stuff, they're put in adult sections of bookstores. And we don't have the beads like in the old Blockbuster or something like that, the bead room or something like that, but they're put in a section that is far away from where kids go. You know what I mean? So I think that there's just like this general like acceptance of like, that section is yours, that section is yours, that section is yours, whatever you're into, you go to your own section.
Damn, dang, yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, it's definitely like, I don't think there's really any adult, like, there's not really many bookstores here in general, so I don't know if like what there's like any adult sections. I don't think so. Not any mainstream like Barnes and Nobles or anything like that. You wouldn't see anything like that. Maybe like magazines or adult like romance comic novels and stuff like that, but nothing like super crazy. There wouldn't be nothing crazy on the cover other than like a dude or something like that, or a girl. But yeah. So when people come and check out your stuff, what are some of the things that they kind of like are really interested in? Or like, I know you post a lot of that type of stuff on your Instagram, or you post like the magazines with the models and things like that. I remember even one time you had to post like kind of like a clarity for people because I don't know if you're getting some sort of flack for people for posting certain things on your Instagram. So, how did that come about? What was that about and stuff like that,
Well, I mean, predominantly I sell like vintage and, just cool manga, art books, photo books, vintage magazines and stuff like that. But within all of that, I also do sell adult, like vintage Pinky magazines, vintage bondage magazines, erotic manga, and just kind of like anything that I think that someone might like that they normally wouldn't have access to. In the very beginning, before I started the bookshop, I just had like a small YouTube channel where I just try to introduce rad art, rad manga to people that otherwise wouldn't have access to it, because maybe they don't know who Kensuke Kage is, but I like his stuff. He's an amazing artist. He does like kind of erotic samurai stories based in the Edo period, and it's beautiful art. I've met him, I've bought original artwork from him and stuff, and I was like, these people deserve to have kind of a light shown on them too. So but the customers that come to our shop to visit or that buy from us online, a lot of them have a deep appreciation for Japanese art, Japanese manga, and they have their interests. Maybe they like 70s like Gekiga like action, maybe they like early 90s erotica, maybe they like 1960s Pinky magazines, maybe they like Miyazaki Hayao, Ghibli art books. It's like a little bit of everything in there. But predominantly we sell, I would say our number one seller is manga, number two art books, and then number three would be probably adult stuff, magazines, manga, all things adjacent.
Nice, man. That's dope. That's dope. Yeah, you have a wide variety of things on your site, and it is very much appreciated. Like, I think a lot of people, like I said, when we were talking earlier, like how you kind of are curating this like taste or like a tastemaker to a degree with Westerners and people who might not even see certain things or even know about it, and you're definitely like curating and teaching people things that they wouldn't necessarily know unless they had the opportunity to go to Japan. Even if they went to Japan, they might not even know what to look for. They might, be a chicken with their head cut off, just kind of walking around and stuff. Like,
one point to make, it's like in Japan, when you go to a manga shop, unless it's a real small mom and pop shop, everything is sealed. So you can't open it and look inside. You just have to look at the cover, look at the spine. And if you can't read Japanese, then it makes it even harder, right? Because you can't read what it is. You just have to go off of the cover. Whereas a lot of my customers, when they come to the shop here, or of course, when I'm showing stuff online, whether it's Instagram or our website or YouTube or whatever, they get to actually see the contents of
of what it is, you know, because everything's open and people can just open it up and take a look inside of it. And we just always had the philosophy is like, if it's cool and you show it, someone will be interested in it, you know? And I just try to find cool stuff, show it off. And if people like it, they like it. I honestly, to be honest, when I started this thing, I didn't think there'd be as many weirdos out there like me. But there's a lot of people out there that are interested in different art. They get tired of superheroes and the same old, you know, and they want new inspiration or new, you know, find different interests and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's just like the beauty of just like the internet, and then like in a way where you can connect and find things and learn more, you know, things that's what it's supposed to be for, you know, and stuff like that. What is the reason why they have all the books sealed up at the stores?
The main reason is we call it tachiyomi. Tachiyomi means standing reading. So like you're on an in between business meetings, you have an hour to kill. That a lot of times you might just walk into a convenience store and start reading a magazine for an hour. You know, if you look at old pictures from like the 70s, 80s, up into the 90s, you can see pictures of people in bookstores, just tons of people standing around reading and not buying, you know, or in convenience stores reading and not buying. So over time, they started sealing stuff up so that people don't just mill around and read the books without buying them. So that's basically why.
Are there any current like magazines or adult manga now that became like prevalent in Japan today, or is it most of the stuff like kind of over and done with? Like Penthouse kind of like went away, the comics kind of went away. I think they're kind of making a resurgence, but it's not the same, or it hasn't been the same yet. I think it's like quarterly or not even annually now compared to when it was a monthly thing back in the 90s. Playboy is kind of gone to, I think it's an annual magazine now, because everything, I mean, all that type of adult material is now just online, like videos and stuff like that. So in Japan, is there still like a prevalence in like those type of magazines or material, or how is that out there?
Yes, there's still like, I mean, Playboy is still put out here, I want to say bi-monthly, but there's still adult magazines that are put out monthly that contain erotic manga in them, or, you know, and there's also, if you go to somewhere like a major bookstore, they'll have monthly manga magazines that deal with mostly adult content. But again, their publication rate, their you know, the print numbers are much lower than anything mainstream like Jump or something like that. But there is a segment for it out here, and but it's not. Again, it's one of those things that I think you really have to go out and look for. You're not just going to walk into the corner bookstore. You'll find some adult stuff maybe in there, but for the people that are really into that stuff, they're going to specific bookstores that deal with those kinds of books, you know. But then you go to somewhere like Mandarake and Akihabara, I want to say 7 floors, 8 floors, and 1 floor is dedicated completely to doujinshi and adult content. So yeah, I guess it depends on the store, but that's also all secondhand stuff as well.
Interesting. Are there any artists that started off like doing that type of material, like adult material, and kind of moved into like the mainstream? Like I know off rip like Boichi, he started off doing that type of material, and now he did Doctor Stone, and he has another series coming out. He's really big, popular. He's Korean, but he does manga, and he's published through Jump and stuff like that. Do you know anybody who's kind of been in that wheelhouse?
Well, I know the opposite is often true. So Japan's had a lot of horror booms, and with like horror film booms, like in the early 90s, and you had like a huge horror booms. So the mangaka producing horror were doing really well. And then when the horror boom died, then some of them went over and started doing ero manga because they couldn't sell the horror stuff, you know? And then on the other hand, you do sometimes have somebody that was like they would do kind of erotic illustrations on the side for magazines to make some extra bucks, but their real intention was to do mainstream manga. But in my experience, I find the other to be a little bit more common. I mean, Shiro Masamune, Ghost in the Shell, Appleseed, Dominion Tank Police, one of the most famous, cyberpunk mangaka of all time. Now he does just digital erotic stuff. That's all he does. He doesn't do anything cyberpunk. He doesn't even make manga. He does illustration books like, what do we have over here? Nitron Depot, Greaseberries, like stuff that's very drippy and nothing like Ghost in the Shell. Although Ghost in the Shell did have a crazy scene in it that was deleted from the, what was it, Viz release of Ghost in the Shell, because I don't think they could handle the content.
That's funny. Do you think like sex help sells like certain manga or things like that? Like I know, like I think some of the magazines like Young Jump, they'll sometimes they'll put like a swimsuit model on the cover and things like that. Does that, you feel like that helps entice people to pick up the magazine more? And even artists, when they add some more of that type of stuff in their material, you think that helps a lot? And then second to that, is there like an air of like over here sometimes, like especially like in the indie scene, like in Kickstarter, for example, there's these people who they call them not safe for work comics. So they'll make a comic and they'll have like a lot of covers. They're like nudie covers or bikini covers, or like, girls with big, TNA and stuff like that. And then there's like this faction of people who make comics on Kickstarter who make like regular comics, whatever, or like mainstream, whatever you would have it. And they kind of hate on the fact that those comics will do a lot better on Kickstarter compared to somebody who do something just regular schmegular or not being like NSFW type material. So how does that work over there?
Well, for sure, sex sells. Jeff Darrow had a funny thing that he said to me, because he'd been coming to Japan since the 80s, and he had met with a publisher. I don't remember if it was Young Magazine or it was one of those, and they said that the size of the T directly correlated into the number of sales for that weekly manga magazine for the model on the cover, right? So I mean, they almost all of the seinen manga magazines here. So that includes, manga that includes like, popular titles like Psychopaths or, like some, like major mainstream manga is the content, but the covers are always going to have a bikini girl on them, or some cosplay girl or something like that. There's always going to be one or two photo spreads in there, and then you're going to have manga in there. And that's, of course, to boost sales for those artists. And, as far as content goes, man, like Japan's never been prude when it comes to having like sex or sexual content in, Chainsaw Man. I love Chainsaw Man. It's amazing. And there's a lot of like kind of like sexy parts, he wants to touch a boobie. That's what he talks about all the time, or Dan Da Dan, really popular right now. Also has those aliens are pervs, dude. And Berserk, Casca gets naked a bunch of times in Berserk, So I don't think Japan's ever really strayed away from adding sexual content to something like action or sci-fi or something like that, because they know it's going to draw in more readers.
Yeah, like they call it fan service. It kind of like helps a lot and keep people like on their toes or enticed and stuff like that. A lot of the jiggly material and things like that. So that is pretty interesting. And yeah, that is true. A lot of the more popular manga now will have certain things like that, like Danzan, like the premise, like initially it was like him getting his balls back, right? And then Chainsaw Man, trying to touch the boob and just, but also kind of has like, that's kind of like, it's also played off as kind of like a funny thing and, things like that. So it works, and it definitely would translate over depending on, the audience who's trying to reach. And obviously over here, sex sells as well. It's just like the way you go about it, I guess you have to be more specific or different. I guess it's not just upfront, on the magazine of like Image Comics, like they do an anthology, they're not gonna just put like a model on the cover, because I guess, but they will get a commission an artist to do a drawing, like Adam Hughes or somebody like that, to do like a sexy cover of a character. You know what I'm saying? So
Tim Vigil or someone like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they'll get somebody to do a character in a more voluptuous way, and that can help, like a Power Girl or something like that. But putting a model on the cover, like actual person, it might hit some like Rocky Road type, thing, which is kind of a weird division,
Yeah, it's kind of like, again, just to kind of like sum up the kind of the vibe of things here. I had a friend that was visiting from America, from Texas. He was checking out an adult magazine at 7-Eleven. An old lady walked by him and he panicked and like stuffed it behind another magazine or something like that. But you would never see like a Japanese salaryman standing there, like looking at a magazine in 7-Eleven. Somebody walks by, he gets embarrassed and puts it away. It's just not in the culture to do something like that. So of course sex does sell, and of course everyone has their own proclivities and interests, and out here as far as content goes, it's pretty kind of wide open. And again, going back to it, as long as you follow the rules.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, 'cause like like you were saying, the censorship hasn't changed, but it seems to be lenient in some aspects, but then they're hard on certain other aspects of depending on what the editor or like the publishers are allowed to show or give to the consumer. But even then, people don't judge, or at least openly won't judge you for what you got going on at that moment. So that is a pretty interesting thing. I mean, I definitely want to try to go out to Japan at least once before, hopefully in the near future, I'll be able to go out there and just go visit and not just go see like, Shibuya or any of that stuff. I want to go see like Mount Fuji and all those other things like that, the hot springs, and, go see the countryside. Yeah, definitely going to go out there eventually.
Yeah, man. Always welcome,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people online, they hear this stuff about like the anti-foreigner, or there's too many disrespectful, like bad mannered tourists and this and that. But I've been here 23 years. At one point, I was a tourist many times before I moved out here. And while there is a ton of tourism in those places like Shibuya or Shinjuku or Akihabara, you don't have to go to those places. There's lots of other places to go out here where you can avoid that whole chaos of everything in those areas. So yeah, come on out, check it out, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think that's a good stopping point. That's kind of the last couple questions I had for you. If you had anything else you want to talk about or say, we can go ahead. But if not, then I'm good on my end.
A shameless plug, really quick. JapanBookHunter.com is where we sell our books, manga, art books, vintage magazines, all things anime adjacent, manga adjacent, and of course, Japan Book Hunter on Instagram and Japan Book Hunter here on YouTube.